Vladimir Putin steps in front of the cameras and tells you about the Komsomolsk victories in imaginary cities that don't even exist on the map.
Komsomolsk is Kupiansk, Slavyansk, and a little further northeast is Seversk.
But the real Russia is experiencing a completely different hell. The real Russia is gasping for breath in front of locked factory gates in the industrial zones of Samara, Tolyatti, and Moscow. Highly skilled engineers, motor mechanics and technicians who once earned 120,000 rubles at AvtoVAZ.
Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, the first series car Voda Lara is ready to roll off the assembly line.
Wonderful. I extend my heartfelt congratulations to you and the entire AvtoVAZ team for this achievement. It's visible on my TV screen just slightly to your left.
Now they are condemned to 45,000 rubles, a poverty wage below the starvation line. Russian Railways, which employs 700,000 people and is the lifeblood of the war economy, is demanding urgent rescue from the government. At the Yaroslavl shipyard, 850 workers have not received a single ruble in wages for 2 months. The project, 23,470 Kapitan Ushakov tugboat, operated by demoralized crews, is sinking in the waters of St. Petersburg. However, the real scandal, the real humiliation, is not in the paychecks, but on the production lines and in the basements of AvtoVAZ. And management offered the country's most qualified minds a humiliating, degrading choice. Either resign and leave, or clean the toilets, paint the walls, and carry debris. Some workers are resigning and moving into taxi driving, delivery jobs, and defense companies offering higher salaries. War is suffocating the civilian industry and drawing its workers into its orbit. A Lada dealership employee's confession sums up how rotten the system is in a single sentence. Most of our sales depend on state subsidies. Without them, customers would turn to Chinese models without a second thought. Amid all this chaos, hunger, engineers being driven into basements and bankrupt railways, a much larger, much more insidious and irreversible strategic disaster is unfolding. One that the Kremlin has quietly accepted, forbidden to discuss, and kept hidden like a state secret. The name of this disaster: the Russian Federation's silent annexation by the People's Republic of China, without firing a single shot. When Western automotive giants, technology companies, Mercedes, Siemens, left Russia, what did Putin and his propagandists tell the people? "We will make our own cars! Soviet industry will return!" This was the biggest lie of the century, because that void was filled not by Russian brands, but by Chinese brands, arriving like an occupying force. The numbers are terrifying and indisputable. As of 2024, 60% of new cars sold in Russia and 85% of imported cars are Chinese-made. Don't call this free trade, call it colonization. Look, Chinese manufacturers aren't investing in Russia. They are not setting up factories inside Russia. They are not transferring technology to Russian engineers. So what are they doing? They are just sending kits called CKD, complete knockdown. That is, they put the car parts in boxes and send them, and have Russian workers assemble them like Lego. In this system, the added value remaining in Russia is a shamefully low 5 to 10%. 90% of the money, all the profits, all the technology flows to Beijing. Russia is no longer a sovereign, proud state for China. In Beijing's eyes, Russia is just a huge gas station providing cheap oil and a helpless, forced market that has to buy Chinese goods at exorbitant prices. Russia is not industrializing. Russia is deindustrializing, turning into China's assembly workshop. China's ruthless imperial strategy is suffocating Putin not only within Russia, but also in Russia's backyard. Kazakhstan, Russia's most loyal ally, a partner in the Eurasian Economic Union, once Lada's largest export market. But China didn't care about friend Putin's tears. Chinese brands, with their aggressive pricing policies and modern designs, wiped Lada off the Kazakh market. Lada sales exceeded 9,000 units in 2021, but fell to just 1,000 units in 2024. While Vladimir Putin shakes hands with Xi Jinping on stage and talks about unlimited friendship, his dear friend Xi Jinping is driving the final nail into the coffin of Russian industry. Russia has been trapped in China's strategic trap. Moscow can no longer even sell cars in its own backyard without Beijing's permission. This is geopolitical bankruptcy. And now, Vladimir Putin faces a deadly devil's dilemma with no solution. Russia's coffers, the National Welfare Fund, NWF, are rapidly dwindling. This fund was the country's last insurance policy. Now Putin must make a choice. Spend the last $1 billion left in the state's hands to rescue the bankrupt Russian railways, RZD, and the sinking AvtoVAZ. This might temporarily quell the uprising in industrial cities like Tolyatti and Samara. It might put a little honey on the workers' lips. But if he buries this money in industry, the resources to finance the war at the front will dry up. Ammunition production will stop. Soldiers' salaries cannot be paid. Tanks cannot be fueled. The army will collapse. Another option is to persist on the current course. Bury all the money in war, missiles, destroying Ukraine, and leave industry to die. This means mass unemployment, starvation, and an inevitable mutiny in Tolyatti, Samara, Novgorod, and hundreds of industrial cities. Missiles don't fill stomachs when the people are starving. Do you know how the Kremlin is trying to get out of this impasse? Just like the collapsing Soviet Union, by banning the truth. The Kremlin has officially banned the use of the word recession on state television, in official reports, and in bureaucracy. But you can't cure a cancer patient by telling them they're as healthy as a horse. You can't change mathematics by banning words. A hungry worker struggling to make ends meet won't heed a ban on his strike, his rebellion. The epicenter of this collapse is Tolyatti, known as Russia's Detroit, and its heart, the AvtoVAZ factories. This is not just a factory, it is a massive monogorod monster that feeds 40,000 people directly in the Samara region and 55,000 families, including the ancillary industries, enabling the city to breathe. The city is the factory is the city. And right now, that heart is about to stop. AvtoVAZ's situation is, quite literally, a chain reaction traffic accident. The company has been forced to aggressively reduce its 2025 production target from 500,000 vehicles to approximately 300,000. Understand what these numbers mean. This is not just a target revision. It is an official admission that the market has evaporated by 40%, that demand has been wiped out. Sales of the flagship Lada models are expected to plummet by up to 25% this year. Why? Because the war economy pursued by the Kremlin has bled the people dry. During the war years, the average price of a Russian car has skyrocketed by more than 50% to 2.96 million rubles. At the same time, the central bank's skyrocketing interest rates and credit freeze have destroyed the purchasing power of ordinary Russians. So, how did factory management respond to this crisis? With a modern slavery system, namely the hidden unemployment regime. Management does not allow people to be fired and thrown out onto the streets to gather in Tolyatti squares. They keep them inside the factory, but crush their spirits and wallets. As of September 29th, the company switched to a 4-day work week for a period of 6 months. This decision meant that overtime pay, bonuses, and commissions for workers were gone overnight. However, the real scandal, the real humiliation, is not in the paychecks, but on the factory's production lines and in the basements. What did factory management offer workers in exchange for these reduced wages? Cleaning, repairs, and auxiliary work in workshops and basements. This crisis of side jobs, confirmed by information from the Ukrainian intelligence service, involves forcing skilled workers into unskilled jobs at low wages. Workers are resigning and moving into taxi driving, delivery jobs, and defense companies offering higher wages. The war is suffocating the civilian industry and drawing its workers into its orbit. Life is not easy for those who remain either. It is impossible for a family to survive on 45,000 rubles in an industrial city like Tolyatti. The basic expenses for a modest apartment in an industrial city in Russia can easily reach 12,000 to 15,000 rubles. As the industry collapses, Russia's logistical backbone is also shaking. Russian Railways is the largest employer in the Russian Federation, employing a full 700,000 people. But the rails are not as busy as they used to be. Sanctions have reduced demand for critical export items such as coal shipments and metal cargoes. And as factories in Russia slow down, domestic shipments have also decreased. Rising fuel prices and the withdrawal of state subsidies have plunged RZD into massive losses, forcing it to request emergency bailout funds from the government. This bailout request is expected to be covered by Russia's sovereign wealth fund, which was set aside for the country's most difficult times. Russia's largest truck and defense vehicle manufacturer, KAMAZ, is another giant employing 30,000 people. KAMAZ is a vital institution for the war economy, producing both military and civilian vehicles. Under normal circumstances, the high demand for military vehicle production should offset the decline in the civilian market. However, contrary to expectations, KAMAZ has struggled in the face of falling civilian demand and, like AvtoVAZ, has been forced to switch to a 4-day work week. This decision shows that the apparent successes in military production cannot hide the depth of the slump in the civilian economy. Cutting the wages and working hours of skilled workers in this way is destroying the morale and loyalty of personnel in the country's most strategic industries. The same gloomy picture has emerged at Gaz Group, which employs more than 20,000 people and produces buses, trucks, and minibuses. Demand has suddenly collapsed, forcing the company to switch to a 4-day work week. The industrial collapse has also devastated the basic raw materials and mining sectors. The story of Michel, a coal and mining giant employing over 50,000 people, shows the harsh impact of sanctions and falling global coal prices. Once the center of Russia's industrial power, this giant now resembles a tired machine. Alrosa, the world's largest producer of rough diamonds, is also facing problems due to falling global diamond prices and sanctions affecting export markets. The company has laid off 10% of its non-mining personnel and suspended operations at less profitable mines. This situation is proof of how the West has systematically shut down every channel through which Russia generates revenue. The cement and timber industries, the lifeblood of the construction sector, are also at the center of this chaos. Chemros, a cement giant with 13,000 employees and 18 large facilities, has been forced to switch to a 4-day work week due to restrictions on housing and infrastructure spending. Subsequently, the wood and plywood company Cerveza shut down an entire factory, causing 300 people to lose their jobs. The latest and most painful consequence of this economic collapse is the emptying of Russian households' pots. Statistics show that Russians are now eating less. Consumption of milk and dairy products has decreased by 8%. Rice purchases have fallen by 10%. The Kremlin will want to maintain its current strategy in this chaotic environment, prioritizing oil and gas revenues for military spending and the front lines. This is the most likely move for Putin to maintain his grip on power. However, this means a wave of mass unemployment and deprivation in Tolyatti, Samara, and other industrial centers. The preference to export crude oil rather than supply the domestic market with fuel due to refinery attacks is already proof of this strategy. This path will lead to the peak of public anger and the potential for mutiny. If Russia continues on its current trajectory, that is, if it tries to continue the war by sacrificing its domestic market, what awaits Russia is certain. The Kremlin, banning the truth as it did during the Soviet collapse. Putin, by order from the Kremlin itself, officially banned the use of the word recession on state television and in official documents. Just like calling the war a special military operation. But you can't cure a cancer patient by telling them they're as healthy as a horse. You can't change mathematics by banning words. Putin can ban words, but he can't stop hunger and rebellion. Russia's strategic reserves are dwindling. Skilled labor is either dying on the front lines or becoming couriers. The logistics backbone is collapsing. The verdict is harsh and final. Russia's two strategic pillars, AvtoVAZ and Russian railways, have been crushed simultaneously. This is not an industrial crisis, but the absolute collapse of the home front. While skilled labor rebels, the logistical backbone desperately demands rescue. Putin's promise of economic stability has been destroyed. Moscow faces the disappointment and anger of its own people, and Russia, once a superpower, is turning into a technological and economic vassal state of China. In this equation, there is no victory for Russia, not even an honorable exit. The war has now reached the heart of Samara and Moscow, and the ground is ripe for rebellion. This is a checkmate for the Putin regime, both internally and externally. So, what are your thoughts on this?